As we count down the days to Las Vegas, I'm connecting with speakers, sponsors, and industry experts to get a pulse on what we can expect to see at Enterprise Connect 2026.
Hi, my name is Eric Hanson. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer of Mitel, proven leader in secure, flexible business communications trusted by organizations around the world that are unwilling to compromise on control, reliability, or innovation. It's a really exciting time. Excited to participate in Enterprise Connect and really think about how we help customers support the technology that they're using today and prepare for the opportunities of tomorrow.
Eric, it is really good to connect with you as we are counting down the final days to Enterprise Connect. It is always one of those moments of the year where it feels like a collective look back on what were the big topics and ideas and shifts that happened over the last 12 months. But it also is a moment for us as an industry to reset on what will the year to come be defined by. And here's what I'd love to do with you during our time together. I want to talk a little bit about specifically the conference and what Mitel and your team are excited about, but also what do we think is going to really be some of the defining things that happen in enterprise communication, collaboration, and customer experience in the year ahead, if that sounds good to you.
That sounds great.
Awesome. Let's start with some of the big things that will be playing out at EC26. When you look at this year's event, what do you see as maybe the biggest shift that's shaping enterprise communications right now?
I think we're at a pretty big pivot point. I mean, certainly we've been talking about it for a couple of years now. And I think, some of the analysts in the industry have said, wow, you really called that. And certainly we've been talking a lot about hybrid or integrated hybrid and multi-cloud communication strategies. But I actually think that in the last probably 6 months, that has really started to pick up steam and actually catch its stride, I think, in terms of what we're hearing from customers around the world. And so I actually think, while certainly, during the pandemic, it was a race to multi-tenant public cloud and video first sort of experiences to kind of bridge that, what was happening in the world at that moment in time. I actually think we're entering a new era, which is more about control and continuity as the mechanism to really embed communications and business process or workflows. And certainly AI has a huge role to play in that as an enabling technology, but not necessarily as a category. And so I think that's really, when I talk to customers, I talk to our partners, that's really what I'm hearing in terms of this next phase of communications as it evolves. It really helps organizations given the global dynamics we're all facing.
I can imagine that's somewhat affirming to your team on having this belief and intentional decision that you as an organization made, and to see now enterprises either recognizing for the first time or also having that reassurance of this is the right strategy for many businesses as they try to think of what's going to enable them to be most successful in the years ahead.
Yeah, it for sure it is. It's validation. But I think at the end of the day, I think the thing that I'm the most proud of in terms of our company and those that are, boots on the ground, so to speak, around the world, we really reflect, I think, what organizations are saying and have been saying for a while, even if they couldn't articulate it as succinctly as maybe I just did. Certainly the pain points, the requirements, the challenges that they were facing were things that we were reflecting as we started to talk about what we believe to be the future. And so I think, for a company like Mitel that measures the lifetime tenure of its customers in decades, not years, you have to be able to evolve with customers, anticipate what they're trying to deal with today and where they believe that they may be going tomorrow, and really help evolve with them.
Yeah, so let's talk about that a little bit more specifically. One of the things that Mitel has said is that you're not retrofitting legacy systems, but actually rebuilding communications from the ground up. What's your take on why that's important for business leaders to be thinking about, especially in this moment?
I think that so often you find that technology vendors try to gravitate toward what's hot and then bolt it on to what they have. And, I would argue that we're not trying to abandon our, heritage base or our heritage products or the like. It's like, how do you take the best of some of those technologies and create something interesting and new that also provides a path to incorporate emerging technologies like AI? right? So I think from that perspective, it's really how do you create that bridge for customers? Again, we're very focused on enterprise. And so in enterprise, when they're making communications decisions, these are decisions that, again, last a long time and need to evolve with the dynamics of their business. And so I think, for us, whether it's, look, everybody was a race towards, public cloud a few years ago, and that was the only way that innovation was going to happen in the process of digital transformation for a lot of organizations. That was what was expected. The reality is that that's not really what's played out, and that as the economies of scale have made things and the business requirements and global dynamics have made things like private cloud or even a next generation of prem that includes AI intelligence, why wouldn't you choose to incorporate some of those things to really try and think about the right tool for the right job, for the right use case, right? And so I think what's happening is this shift towards business strategy for a given organization driving the boat versus the fear of missing out and chasing the next bright, shiny object. And so I think, again, it's about, the right tool for the right job and incorporating that. That's why hybrid is such a hot topic, even though it's an overused word. This idea of an integrated hybrid approach to your communication strategy, aligned to your business strategy and the way you work, I think is really what the future holds.
Yeah, I agree with you in terms of the shift. Not saying that enterprises were ever unintentional in their decisions, but I do believe that we are entering an era of extreme intentionality in how work is designed and delivered, and then ensuring that the tools and capabilities we're bringing to bear support that, rather than chasing after those shiny objects and then trying to shove the way work happens, retrofit it into those constraints. So I think that intentionality is really important.
Just to build on that idea, I think there's two things that we always were fighting against, and I think now we're starting to embrace, right? And if you think about it, right, look what's happening with AI. The right combination of that which will be in the cloud versus at the edge. Why? Because people want control, right? They want control over certain aspects of their business. And that's not to abandon cloud. It's use cloud in the right ways for flexibility while also maintaining the right degree of control where it matters most, right? Why would communications be any different? I'll give you a second example. We all hated two-factor authentication when it started to hit the mainstream, right? In terms of the way that we secure our personal identities and our access to the applications we all know and love. Now we embrace that complexity because we're all worried about being hacked, right? Again, complexity can be your friend and a great defense against some of the future risks that we all face based on what's happening in business. And so I think that it's that intentionality, that deliberate embracing of complexity in some cases can be your friend if it's part of the strategy versus reacting to the complexity, right? It's about controlling it.
Yeah, that's such a good point. That's what gets me, I think, most excited about the next era of work is we really do now have a full suite of capabilities that if we're thoughtful about design, just really, really cool things will happen. I want to go back though. You said something earlier about the shifting dynamics of the enterprise, and one of the things that I think we all see playing out is how mobile first and enabling our workforce to kind of work in different aspects and regions, and just there's so much shifting in terms of mobility at work. Where do you see that trend impacting specifically kind of the architecture choices that enterprises are making to the point of how it's shifting? How do you make sure the underlying structure is right for that?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously the definition of mobile is shifting as well as it's maturing in terms of how it's a part of an architecture or part of the way that you plan, whether it's your communication strategy or some of the other categories that are important, technology categories that are important to your business, right? Certainly private 5G is a great example in industries like manufacturing and healthcare. In-home care, right? I noticed in the latest jobs report reflecting January in the US that one of the top industries in terms of new jobs was in healthcare, and that was dominated by frontline workers providing in-home care, which I think was very interesting. So you think about what their experiences need to be, right? And so I think, again, there's an element of control, an element of privacy, where one size fits all approaches and the aspect of security that's really important to a category like healthcare really, really matter, right? This is not about using a consumer app on your personal device. This is about a corporate liable device connecting over private 5G in some cases, depending upon what the use case is, and really being thoughtful about both the use case from the user's perspective, right? but also from a risk mitigation perspective on the business side or on the organization side. Right. So I think that thoughtful implementation at an architectural level is one of the things that we're seeing, not just in something like healthcare, but in many different industries. Right. My hobby is fruit farming. Right. I have 46 fruit trees on a couple of acres in Northern California. I have some equipment in order to care and feed my hobby. Right. And I had a field service person come out to service a piece of equipment. They were reliant, based on where I live, on being able to use a mobile device, but it wasn't a personal mobile device. They needed to tie into, based on privacy concerns, based on the management of me as a customer for that organization. They all had to tie back into corporate infrastructure using a corporate liable device. And so those types of use cases, which I would argue are the use cases that have been underserved by our industry in the race towards SaaS and in the race towards public cloud over the last decade, those are the things that are popping to the top in terms of being a priority now as we try to incorporate and be much more inclusive with the entire workforce versus just knowledge workers, and then trying to apply knowledge worker experiences to frontline workers as examples. So I think that that's where mobility is really going to take a front seat. I think as we equip and enable this more diverse set of workforce profiles, that takes the front seat, in my opinion.
Yeah, and the other thing I think about that, Eric, is you made a really good point in terms of that part of the workforce being underserved from a capability and resource standpoint. But I also then think about the organization being underserved in the data sprawl and the disparity of how that information was communicated or managed historically. And it really becomes a win-win for both that employee wherever they're at and the organization who's trying to be more intentional and informed about how they're investing resources, how they're making decisions. So it really does become smart.
As I mentioned, we had our global kickoff over the last 2 days. And one of the use cases we were talking about, we do very well in the cruise industry, which in my opinion is sort of a sub-element of hospitality, if you will. But what do you do from a communications perspective when you don't have connectivity to the outside world? That's a real use case on oil rigs. That's a real use case on cruise ships. That's a real use case when you're facing natural disasters and some of the weather patterns we've seen over the last several years, right? And so that ability to stay connected with your peers within a given job site is another aspect of mobility that I think has not been discussed enough in our industry, in terms of how do you ensure that people can address the needs of the moment when that moment is really critical to what's happening around your employees, around your customers, around your community. And so I think that that's another element of mobility that I think we're going to see a lot more discussion around. Certainly, we're very excited about some of the innovation that we're driving in that particular area. Again, that spans some of the most critical industries that employ the most people in the world: manufacturing, healthcare, emergency services, right? Those things that are very dominated by frontline workers.
Yeah, it's so good. And it also highlights how I think people make the mistake or just rush to assume the use case without realizing all of these underserved or very specific places where there's a real need. And the question becomes, who is willing to step up, understand, and then meet that need in the most effective way, which I think is, certainly clearly a smart decision on your team's behalf to ensure that you're able to do that. One of the things, kind of building on, honestly, all of this, and, we've used the term a couple times, if we're not going to be able to avoid it at Enterprise Connect, is the role that artificial intelligence is or will or might play in all of this, whether it's practical AI, agentic AI. What's your take on what's real right now, and what are maybe even the things that buyers should be preparing for in the, let's call the horizon 12 months to come?
Yeah. Well, I think one of the things that I've been a big proponent of over the last several years, there's no question that AI is an exciting and enabling technology on a number of different fronts. I mean, what the potential that it offers us as a technology player in terms of driving productivity within our own organization or in the solutions that we deliver to the market for customers and how they serve their customers. I think there's no question, very, very exciting. What I think is interesting, and I think might resonate with the people that are attending Enterprise Connect, our CTO just attended another event this last week in Florida, and the topic on many CIO and CTO's mind was less about, again, the art of the possible and more around governance, more around implementation, more around monetization. How do I ensure that all of the money that I'm spending to experiment and try and implement AI is actually going to translate into real business impact? And so I think that comes back to just sort of core fundamentals. There's no question that it's exciting and that it can be enabling, regardless of what flavor of AI is and what's going to, it comes back to what are your business fundamentals? What problems are you anticipating and trying to solve, right? For me in marketing, obviously, I'm looking at how do I scale a team like product marketing or my content marketing team? And how do I get the best out of the people, the carbon-based assets that I have and augment that with digital assets, right? In terms of, potentially teaching the skills necessary to create virtual product marketers that can help do the mundane. Those are the types of things that I think for a lot of organizations, that's a very quick way to drive productivity and realize value at the bottom line. And at the end of the day, we're in business, right? So we've got to make sure that it aligns to those things. And so I think that the thing that I always talk to customers about is, again, I'm a recovering product marketer, as you know. I always start with what problem are you trying to solve? What are the challenges that your business is facing? And then how can technology, how can efficiency in business workflow, how does communications fit into those workflows? And how can AI help either accelerate or augment, that sort of strategy around solving those problems? I think that's the way that people should be thinking about it. I think over the last probably 5 years or so, it's been much more a race to, I've got to do something. So I've got to throw money at the problem to make sure that I don't miss out and that I don't turn over every rock. And now I think we're then crossing over into what's next, which is what's the practical use based on what's going to drive ultimately value for my business.
Yeah, Eric, 1,000% agree that that's what I'm seeing play out. That's what I'm hearing discussed. I've actually said in a few of these conversations that I believe one of the biggest buzzwords at EC or any conference this year is going to be business impact or value. And I'm really encouraging people to pressure test, not the people who are talking about value mattering, but can actually demonstrate that it's happening, understand how do you define value, what's the time to realize it. That's the stuff that matters, and that only happens, we've talked about this now a few times, when we're intentional and when we've got the governance and really that kind of skeleton underneath it to support the weight of all of the stuff that we're hoping to accomplish here.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. It's exciting, right? And as somebody who's been around technology like you for a very long time, you get excited about the possibilities. But at the end of the day, you also have to think about the realities and the practical side of it and be very pragmatic about what's going to address the needs today, what's going to position you really well for tomorrow. I do still encourage, given all of what I just said, experimentation I think is really important to because you don't know what you don't know today. And through experimentation, you're going to get great ideas and then you're going to be able to iterate on those ideas. And so I do think that that's an important element of any emerging technology. But I still think you've got to keep it close to the business fundamentals of what your business is and what the negative consequences are of your current state. And does the investment help you overcome those negative consequences and actually drive value in a future state, right?
Yeah. So this conversation makes me think about something at least I've observed playing out, and it's been this increased focus and attention paid to vertical specific stories and use cases. We're certainly seeing that play out at Enterprise Connect, and honestly, I think across the board, definitely hearing a lot talked about vertical specific things. What's your take on what's driving this maybe renewed surge in looking at kind of niche use cases versus speaking in wider sweeping terms?
Well, I think if you look at our space and you look at, there's a number of companies that track the number of seats in our industry. It's been the same, call it between 400 and 500, million seats that are out there for forever, right? And if you look at what's happened over the last several years, some of the SaaS-based communication products basically grew very quickly and then plateaued at around 20-25% of the overall market, right? And where you saw a big portion of the market sort of not moving was some of the industries that are highly regulated, that have very strict requirements, whether it's for regulatory reasons or because of their preferences around certain risks associated with security, privacy, and control. But that sort of was the state of our industry. And that's part of why frontline workers were underserved, even though lots of vendors talk about, I'm going to go after frontline workers this year. The reality is they were applying a horizontal solution to a specialized problem. I think today, because of the cost of technology, the cost of private cloud, the cost and deliberate implementation of more of an integrated hybrid approach is opening the door for some new and innovative ways of addressing the needs of specialized workers in some of these vertical industries. And I think that's the opportunity. In fact, one of our customers from the UK is coming out to Enterprise Connect, and I'm going to be hosting him And he represents a hospital that's in the NHS, right? Which is the big public health system in the UK. He's doing some very innovative things, all based on the next generation of Prem, right? Prem used to be a bad word. Now, in some of these industries, it's like, well, I can have my cake and eat it too. I can have the best of cloud and the best of Prem, and it really lights up the opportunities for my frontline workers. That's pretty interesting, right? And so I think that that's part of what is waking up some of these giant industries like healthcare and manufacturing around taking a new look at how they address these problems and apply very innovative technologies, including AI, including mobility, including things like DEC technologies in new ways, right? Like thinking about all of these things and how they converge, AI, people to machine, people to people, regardless of location, all of these things. I think it's a very exciting time. And that's why you're seeing some of these big industries, these really demanding industries sort of wake up and do some pretty interesting things.
Eric, this is like, I just smile hearing you talk about some of this stuff because it's fun to, as you mentioned, think about the potential, but also just to see someone who genuinely cares and making sure something comes to bear that's enabling people to be successful in serving others, whether they're employees, patients, doesn't matter. This is also why I love things like Enterprise Connect, because whether it's the breakout sessions, the main stage, stopping by, booths like Mitel, it's an opportunity to actually have conversations like this. I want to maybe part with two closing questions for you. First one's this. You've talked a little bit about cloud, hybrid, new generation of Prem. If I'm a buyer and I'm coming to the conference, I'm going to be walking around the floor and I'm going to be maybe looking and evaluating at these kind of different options. What do you think is something that I should be asking to make sure I can distinguish what is real from what is just marketing when it comes to those types of technologies?
Steer away from speeds, feeds, and features and think about solutions that are aligned to the biggest challenges your business faces. And that comes back to use cases. What are those high value use cases that are critical to the success of those that you serve as an organization, right? And that includes corporate America and the enterprise. That includes healthcare when you're serving patients, all of those things. And so I think it comes back to ask questions, very specific questions around those high value use cases and the profiles of the workforce that are the most important to lighting those use cases up. That would be one thing that I would do as you're interacting with vendors, right? The second is, what are the proof points? Who have you done this for before? And how long have you been working with those organizations? Because in every business, our needs change, our needs evolve based on what the possibilities are from a technology perspective and where that intersects with the dynamics of our given industry or the environment that we work in geopolitically, right? I mean, just look at what's happening around us right now. And so I think that that intersection point becomes really important as you're fleshing things out with, when you're considering a vendor or you're thinking about a solution. Again, is the success of the organization you're talking to measured in years, decades? You probably want somebody, given if you're an enterprise organization, thinking about the size of this type of opportunity relative to communications and the percentage of your employee base that it touches, or your customers for that matter. You probably want to think about somebody that has actually evolved and been an innovator over decades versus years, right? And so I think those are some of the things that, those proof points stand the test of time. I think it's really important given some of what we're talking about relative to governance, relative to being able to evolve, address the dynamics as the dynamics change dynamically within your given industry, and really being able to hit hard on the preferences you may have relative to risk, whether that's business continuity, security, consistency, and immediacy of communication. So I think those are the things that I always kind of come back to. Again, what problem are you trying to solve, being a recovering product marketer? And then, what is going to be the best? What do you think is the best sort of story that supports that with proof points in terms of people that you're considering doing business with?
Yeah, really, really good. Here's the last question for you. As people walk away from Enterprise Connect this year, what is one thing that you want them to think, feel, believe about the future of communications?
I think that, I think it comes back to the communications at the end of the day, although sometimes we forget it, is a strategic technology that touches everybody in your organization. And so you have to care and feed that and make sure that it adapts and that it's embedded in the way that you do business, whether that's in terms of driving the value and productivity out of your workforce, or whether that's how you serve your customers, your patients, the community that you serve, right? And that is a strategic thing. And far too often people forget that until it doesn't work. And then it's a problem. And those that put it on the front burner are those that are going to be very successful given all the dynamics that we're facing.
Yeah. Eric, such great stuff. I look forward to seeing you and the team at Enterprise Connect. We are just a few more days away from the conference. Thank you so much for sharing your perspective with me today.
Always great to talk with you, Justin. Look forward to seeing you soon.
Awesome. Thanks, Eric.